Hey, everybody. I know many of you have been waiting for some coaching on interviews, and I am someone that likes to collect a lot of articles and best practices across many industries to find out the very best advice and recommendations for interviews. So this goes kind of above and beyond the entry level part of doing interviews into more advanced. So it doesn't matter what part of your career you are in. Chances are you're going to have some takeaways from this lecture on things that maybe could be improved or things you should work toward in your next set of interviews. So let's get started. First, we're going to talk about 8 interview mistakes you don't know you're making. So first, failing to research the organization and position. Now, some people say, okay, come on, that's an easy one. I know how this works. But some people don't do a very thorough job, and you have to really spend some time preparing to do that, not just when you apply for a position and kind of looking through a company, okay, they look good, this job looks like it could work for me. This is thorough, deep review, because obviously they see something in you and they're trying to determine fit, so you need to come prepared too. This is painfully obvious to hiring managers. Also, not doing research about yourself and your skills can be a problem. So self-assessment is an invaluable part of the interview process. So remember the do what you are text. This should give you some hints about maybe how you perform interpersonally, your strengths and your weaknesses, and what to be on the lookout for, things that make you comfortable, things that make you uncomfortable, and kind of your own tendencies and preferences. So again, use that personality profile as a guide to help you be successful, being yourself, playing to your strengths. But again, you also need to do that research on the organization. You should know what they've been doing, what is currently facing this organization now, and maybe some of their future, what's ahead. Make sure in the position that you know the kinds of activities you're going to be doing on a regular basis, the kinds of departments you will be interfacing with, and also the projects you will be a part of. You need to know that kind of a thing. So again, put in the time, research the organization and the position, and be prepared to do your own research on you. Second, having an unprofessional online presence. We've talked about this one before. Building your LinkedIn presence or Facebook site or whatever you have, making it look professional and building that presence while you're still in school or while you're in a previous position in another job, and being vigilant about presenting a professional appearance, even on social sites as Facebook, is a really good idea. As a side note, do not send a LinkedIn request to an interviewer before you meet. That's considered kind of out of bounds, and in some cases, not allowable, okay? Once you are officially a candidate in a pool, there are strict laws that govern things like bias and stereotypes and discrimination, and kind of some of this interpersonal stuff can set up risk for both the employer and yourself. Things like disclosures, whether they're accidental, inappropriate questions, or things they find out about you that you really didn't want to share that may bias their thinking about your availability or your contribution or your background. So again, this is something that you have control of. You get to manage. And again, when we talk about building our brand, I have lots of ways for you to do that. I know that sounds very corporate, and given that you're in a class that tackles sociology and criminology, you may not have a corporate position on your radar. That doesn't mean that government agencies, nonprofits, and other organizations aren't going to look at your online presence, especially when they're trying to make the right hire, and they have to make sure that you're representing their organization properly, because they're a public institution, or they have an image issue, or they have maybe even requirements from their employees saying, hey, if you are representing the company, this is appropriate, this is not, or it guards your conduct and what's shareable and whatnot. I mean, we all know the stories of people that have been fired because of unprofessional things going on in their social media sites, because in a way, you're also an extension of your company. Now, that's not to say companies should get completely involved in your own speech rights, in your own personal life. But as we all know, there is just some inevitable crossover, and you have to be very mindful of that. So just keep that in mind. You do have to build your brand, even though that's very jargony corporate lingo. it's a part of making an imprint on your future employer. So don't ignore that. And again, you may have to kind of take down some stuff or maybe clean things up a little bit so that it's a little more appropriate and employer friendly. Poor interview netiquette. Okay, here's the thing. A lot of you or people you know will be interviewing over the phone or video conferencing, especially during a pandemic or especially long distance for positions that are out of state or even out of country. So with so many first and even second and third interviews being conducted over the phone or video conferencing, you have to understand how to interview remotely. So this means you need to be in a quiet space when taking the call. Some people honestly even go to a public library and rent a study room, right? They'll actually request a study room for a certain period of time because they know it's going to be quiet there and it's a clean, easy, well-kept space that they don't have to manage. Obviously, employers will understand if you're working from home and you don't really have other options, but again, it is a little awkward for both employer and interviewee to be interrupted by your dog or your roommate or the kids in the background or the guy mowing the lawn outside your window, things like that. So there are plenty of spaces that are quiet, again, that you could arrange to have, whether it's maybe a conference room, library space. Don't do an interview in a Starbucks because you're going to hear a lot of background noise, right? Or a restaurant. You have to make arrangements for your space ahead of time. And sometimes if you're taking a call or doing a video conference interview in your own space, you may have to schedule other people in your household to be gone or not interrupt you or lock the door or clean up what's behind you, take certain posters off the wall or whatnot. Make sure you dress appropriately for a video interview. You should be dressing the same for a video interview or an in-person interview. I've heard this time and time again. A video interview is not a ticket to casual wear or sloppiness. It is treated exactly the same as a formal interview, and you're making a first impression, so you want to look your best. These are things like recent haircuts, being well-groomed and looking sharp. You may have to get suits dry cleaned. You may need to get, shirts pressed, making sure that you are looking crisp and clean. You'll also want to practice looking at your camera. This is hard to train yourself to do, but this essentially establishes eye contact. It's easy to look down even just a few inches at the interviewer's picture. And of course, you want to kind of read the interviewer, getting those facial expressions, looking for body language. But at the same time, when you're directly answering a question, try to look into the camera of your screen. Right? And they're usually built into the top of the screen. There's usually some kind of dot that flashes a light that tells you that your camera is on. And just focus your eyes on that light. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but it's going to give a sense of eye contact to your interviewer. And chances are your interview is being recorded and shared across other people, and they want to feel like you are looking at them. We have all seen YouTube videos where we're being looked at and not looked at. It's the difference between looking into the camera lens and not. So take time to practice that and get comfortable doing that. It makes a world of difference. Also, not knowing how to sell yourself or your elevator pitch. This is one that's a very common one for people getting out on the job market. Some people have not interviewed for a job in a long time, and they're like, what's an elevator pitch? It's kind of you top to bottom, right? Getting to know you as a person, giving kind of a brief pitch for why you're right for the job, your goals, what you're after, but you want to do it in a way that's concise and accurate. And there are going to be some phrases and language that's better or worse. So again, in some of the things we do in this class, I want you to really craft an elevator pitch so you're prepared, something that you can customize for different organizations. Because maybe your pitch will vary if you're going for nonprofit versus if you're going for state government or federal government, or if you're going for more of a researchy job versus more of a manager job. So make your pitch customizable, but you should have a good foundation for how to sell yourself, right? If you respond to tell me about yourself with, well, my name is Jane and I did, then you're actually doing it wrong. You're kind of wasting the interviewer's time. And this is a common interview question. It's not really getting to know you as a person. It's time to give your pitch and really enforce why you're right for the job. So sometimes it's chit chat and warm up a little bit. So some people kind of undervalue the tell me about yourself question. But it's very purposeful in an interview. Don't waste this opportunity to help your employer connect the dots about you. Forgetting the thank you note or the message. This is an easy one, and some people say, overrated, not really important. Here's the deal. The rule of thumb, as far as etiquette and manners, for any video or phone interview is you can send an email thank you. It's perfectly fine to do an electronic thank you. For any in-person interview, it's suggested to send an email thank you note between 24 to 48 hours later, and if possible, a handwritten thank you note to each person with whom you spoke for more than 10 minutes. And this is when you have to take really good notes and follow your interview schedule to remember names, because you wouldn't want to get someone's name wrong and send them a note, and that looks ridiculous. Your email and written thank yous should be different, and each thank you should be tailored to the recipient. So take the time to write a few brief sentences that are considerate and appreciative of their time. Your email thank you can actually be a little longer and more specific than the handwritten note because, again, people can access these a little easier and kind of scan through them quickly. So you'd be surprised how far this can go. Sometimes this is a standout moment for a candidate. And I have actually seen employers wait for the thank you notes, not get them, and end up having that be a deal breaker for somebody, where they felt like, wow, I gave them a lot of my time, or it took a lot of effort and energy to set up this interview or this panel, and they don't even care. I did them a favor by giving them an interview, and obviously it doesn't matter to them. So some people really need to be, appreciated more than others. We all know who we are. But this is an easy one. This is picking the low-hanging fruit off the tree. Grab it, do it, and move on. It's an easy, fun one to do. And so I always recommend to people who are getting ready to go on the job market, grab a box of stationery, grab some stamps, collect email addresses, and be ready to send your notes. It takes, maybe 10 to 20 minutes to get a bunch of notes out. It's not too effortful, but it makes a big impact. Choosing bad references. This one's funny because sometimes we're just desperate for a reference. We don't even care if it's good or bad. We just have to fill this out. We can't click submit on the application until we have references in there. And so we're clamoring for somebody. Here's the thing. If your boss doesn't know you're looking for a new job, which is fine, you have some discretion in that, and or you don't know what kind of a reference he or she will give you, then don't use your boss as a reference. Choose your references wisely and keep them in the loop about the jobs to which you've applied and any info that they'll need to give you a glowing recommendation. Also, make sure you have the most up-to-date info for any former employers or coworkers. So most of the time, coworkers are pretty easy. You can say, hey, I'm kind of trying out some different jobs. Don't pick coworkers for which you're actively working on projects and teams, because that can kind of be momentum losing and risky professionally. So you might want to choose former coworkers or former employers, or even people outside of your employment community. Now, here's the thing. With references, the most important references are people that have worked closely with you in a professional setting, who have had supervisory responsibility over you, or who have been supervised by you. So professional employment-based references are best. Next best are people that maybe have worked with you academically and seen some of the work you've turned in that can speak to some of your habits and your performance. But sometimes it's hard to find people in those communities, or you're trying to kind of keep your cards close to your chest. You don't want to really tell the whole world you're looking for jobs because it's a little bit sensitive. We get that. So sometimes we have to use references that are people in our faith-based community or people that we've worked with on a volunteer basis. Those people are fine too, but realize that they might not be looked as highly upon as a reference that's more employer-based. So you have your networks, people you work with that you feel safe and that you trust, right? So choose those references wisely and really keep them up to date, because if they go, oh, they put me down as a reference, it looks really bad to a hiring manager because it looks like you don't even keep up with your references. They don't even know what you're doing. It looks very careless, and that's a characteristic an employer does not want in an employee, is keeping people out of the loop. They want them to be in charge and responsible of their information. Rounding out the final two, under or overvaluing your worth. So here's the thing. This comes up in interviews, not often, but it can come up. So salary negotiations. Yes, it can start at the interview well before the offer. Salary negotiations are tricky, but understanding what an appropriate salary range for you can be is easily researched. You can find all kinds of websites that provide you estimates or parameters of high and low and average, so it's not that hard. And certainly you may have people in the field or others you can talk to get a head start. This starts with the interview because hiring managers are attempting to determine, are you worth it? Okay, so this is the beginning of your salary negotiation, is actually the interview. They're trying to get evidence based on what you've shared and your performance to say, okay, are you worth the high salary you're asking for? Or are you kind of more of an entry-level person and don't really need a lot of money to get started? Or I need to train you because in the interview you didn't really seem like you had a lot of experience, so I'm gonna have to invest a lot in you. You shouldn't be asking for a high salary. Do you see how salary comes up in interviews? So in interviews, you may be pressed for salary information, so be prepared to justify a range. And notice how I said that, justify a range. Don't just say, probably this or this. You need to be able to have evidence and back up your requests to say, well, because I've served at this level, or I've already done this kind of work, or I would only require minimal training to get up to speed. I have these skills, I have these experiences, I have this education. This is why this is an appropriate range to me. So you want to kind of use it as a way to underscore your ask of the salary. Justify, justify, justify. Or if you don't want to talk salary in the interview, and that's fine, it seems a little out of bounds for candidates. They're not really ready to go there yet. But some hiring managers are looking for shortcuts to be like, hey, how do I get rid of people that I really can't afford? Let me ask them a salary question in the interview so that I can eliminate, right? So because otherwise it's wasting their time and yours. So you need to have a response prepared if you prefer not to answer. And you can have professional things you say, such as, you know what, I prefer to discuss that during the offer stage, or I can provide you some references that can give you a sense of what that range would be, but I'd rather not get into that during the interview. Is there something else you can ask me? Or is there, there's a way to kind of deflect and divert if that's uncomfortable territory for you, but you want to come up with your strategy of how to say that, because you don't want to offend the interviewer by asking the question. But you also want to make sure that you disclaim and share things you're comfortable with, because it's your interview. You want to be in charge of it. Last thing we'll talk about in mistakes you don't know you're making: not preparing the right questions or asking no questions at the end of an interview. So that's one of the most important parts of the interview. A qualified interviewer, a smart interviewer, is going to leave you some time, at least a few minutes, if not maybe up to 20 minutes or more, to give you a chance to ask questions and find out things for yourself. It also lets them see how much you've really thought about all this and what is interesting to you and how you see yourself fitting into the organization. Okay? So it tells them things by the kinds of questions you ask. It's very common to say, can you tell me when the search is going to wrap up? Or when do you think you'll have a decision made? Those are pretty normal and natural, and they're in bounds for the most part. Now, sometimes they share that during the interview and people don't keep track of it. And then they find out, oh, they probably told me, but I forgot. And so then they ask again. That kind of shows them you weren't listening. So it's perfectly fine to keep a notepad and paper in an interview to take notes. And you can even ask for brief pauses and say, oh, can you give me just one moment? I wanted to jot that down. That is actually quite reasonable. Now, you don't want to constantly interrupt the interview by taking notes, because then you're not really making progress and you're not letting the conversation be natural. It's feeling more like a class. Okay, but you can keep a pad and paper to jot things down, because often interviewers will kind of script you a little bit. Sometimes they're fighting for you and they really want to hire you, and they'll even give you some, I call them softballs, that you can hit out of the park, kind of a low ball that anyone can swing at. They're trying to give you information so that you can kind of use that to your advantage to demonstrate how great you are. So you'd be surprised. It happens all the time. But really think about the questions you're going to ask. And that will be the subject of our next video. So I'll see you then.